Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a post from the Ask Men Advice subreddit. And this guy's story is just full of like twists and turns and suspicion and uncertainty.
Ooh.
Yeah, like a real page turner, but like Reddit style.
Okay.
So let's jump in. So this is a 52-year-old husband. He's been married for 15 years to his 49-year-old wife.
Okay.
They have a son together, and they still enjoy spending time together. But the husband, he kind of feels like the spark, the intimacy, it's just gone.
Yeah, it's interesting how sometimes that decline in intimacy can be like a canary in the coal mine, right? Like it signals that there are some deeper issues at play within the relationship.
Right.
And oftentimes it is kind of the first outward sign that something's not quite right.
Exactly. And so for him, this feeling of something's not quite right, it intensified when he found a photo booth picture tucked away in his wife's office.
Oh.
And this wasn't just any picture. It showed his wife with another man.
Okay.
And the date on the photo happened to coincide with the night that she claimed to be away on a business trip.
Oh my God.
But here's the real kicker. The location tagged on the picture was actually really close to home.
Ooh.
Talk about a red flag.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, like, if you're going to invent a business trip, like, at least make sure the photo booth evidence supports your alibi.
Right. Well, deception is a tricky thing. And, it often starts small.
Yeah.
But then as we add layer upon layer upon layer of the deception, it becomes harder and harder to maintain that facade.
Right.
And these conflicting details about this photograph certainly raise some suspicions.
Yeah, absolutely. And as if the photo wasn't enough, he later found a brand new expensive bra hidden in his wife's office.
Yeah.
And it was a brand that she loves, but she wouldn't typically buy it for herself.
Interesting.
So all of a sudden now his suspicions have morphed into like full-blown paranoia.
Yeah.
He's questioning everything.
Yeah.
He's like, what else don't I know?
Right.
So what does he do?
Hmm.
He turns to the internet.
I wonder.
He posts his story on Reddit in this Ask Men Advice forum, and he's asking for advice. Should he confront his wife with the evidence he has? Or should he wait and try to gather more concrete proof?
That's a good question. This is where the online community comes into play, right? And this is such a fascinating aspect of modern life now because we have this readily available access to a huge network of opinions and perspectives when we are faced with these very personal dilemmas.
Right.
But it's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Totally. Because while it's great to have like all that support and all those different viewpoints, the advice that he received was all over the map.
Yeah.
Some people were very much about gathering more evidence, like document everything meticulously, even hide it securely, just in case your wife tries to delete it or destroy it.
Ah.
Yeah, almost like preparing for like a legal battle.
Well, and that speaks to this growing awareness, I think, that we have of gaslighting as a form of manipulation, right? Where
Yeah.
someone will try and make you doubt your own sanity or your own perceptions of reality. And so in a situation like this where infidelity is suspected, oftentimes people will say, well, make sure you document that, secure that evidence because you might need it later to protect yourself from this kind of emotional manipulation. It's like having that firm grip on reality when everything else feels like it's shifting beneath your feet.
It's heartbreaking to think that you would need to protect yourself
Mm.
from your own spouse. But
Absolutely.
unfortunately, that does happen.
Yes, it does.
And speaking of protection, several commenters advised him to start discreetly separating his finances,
Oh.
just in case things went south.
Yeah.
It's a little cynical maybe, but also incredibly practical. It's like hope for the best, but prepare for the worst.
Right. Well, it's a reflection, I think, of this unfortunate reality that infidelity can lead to separation or divorce.
Right.
And in those situations, financial security becomes really, really paramount. So it's not about being pessimistic. It's about taking those pragmatic steps
Right.
to protect yourself
Right.
when you're in a very, very vulnerable position.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not all the advice was about evidence gathering and legal maneuvering. Some of it was more about emotional preparation.
Okay.
People were warning him about the potential for his wife to just deny everything, to try and twist the narrative, or even blame him for her actions.
Oh, wow.
They urged him to stay calm, detached, and focused on the facts if he decided to confront her.
Yeah, when we suspect infidelity, there's a cascade of emotions that can just come flooding in, right? Hurt, anger, betrayal, even a sense of grief. And when those emotions are running high, it's so easy to get swept up in the drama
Right.
and to make decisions that we might later regret.
So the advice to remain calm, to remain objective, is really about empowering him to navigate this situation with a clear head,
Right.
to make decisions that are rooted in logic rather than in raw emotion.
It's like those commenters were trying to equip him with a psychological toolkit to handle whatever might come his way.
Yeah.
Whether it's a tearful confession or a heated argument or a flat-out denial. Exactly. It's fascinating to me, like, this whole situation taps into, like, this larger conversation about infidelity, right?
Right.
Because you have some people who feel very, very strongly that, like, concrete evidence is the only way to address it.
Right.
Like, you need that irrefutable proof before you can take any action.
Right.
And then you have other people who are like, trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is.
Right. It's like two different schools of thought clashing. The need for evidence versus the follow your heart instinct.
Exactly.
I can only imagine how tough that must be for him to navigate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And especially when you layer on top of that the emotional fallout of a potential betrayal.
Right.
He's already grappling with, like, feelings of hurt and uncertainty.
Right.
And then you add on top of that this information overload of advice.
Right.
Some of it contradictory, coming from all these different directions.
So is there a right way to handle this?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah. Should he focus on building a case, like collecting enough evidence to confront his wife with, like, undeniable proof?
Right.
Or should he just prioritize his own well-being and make a decision based on whether he still trusts her evidence or no evidence?
You know, it's such a personal decision, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer. But I do think self-awareness is really critical in these situations.
Right.
He needs to understand, what is his emotional state?
Right.
What does he value? What does he want from this relationship?
Okay.
Because that's the foundation upon which he can make any decision.
So even if he finds that smoking gun evidence, the trust might already be broken beyond repair.
Exactly.
Rebuilding that's a whole other challenge, regardless of what Reddit might tell him to do.
Precisely. You know, infidelity is often a symptom of much deeper issues within the relationship.
Okay.
And even if the evidence confirms his suspicion, it's important to remember that the affair itself is not the root cause.
Right.
It's a manifestation of some underlying problems.
Okay.
Whether it's lack of communication or emotional disconnect or unmet needs.
Right. Like they say, the grass is greener where you water it.
Ooh, I love that.
If you're not nurturing your own relationship, it's easy to get tempted by this illusion that maybe things will be better somewhere else.
That's a perfect analogy. And it brings up this important question of, like, what is his goal?
Right.
Does he want to expose his wife? Does he want to seek revenge? Or does he want to understand what went wrong and potentially try to salvage the relationship?
Because if it's about understanding that, requires a different approach.
Exactly.
It's not about building a case. It's about having that really honest, sometimes painful, vulnerable conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, because confrontation, even when you have evidence, can lead to a lot of defensiveness. It can lead to denial.
Right.
So it's about creating that safe space for dialogue where both partners can openly express their feelings and needs.
That sounds a lot harder than just like throwing a photo on the table and saying, gotcha.
It is.
But it could be a lot more constructive in the long run, even if it doesn't lead to reconciliation.
Right.
At the very least, it opens the door to understanding both for yourself and the other person.
Right. And understanding is often that first step towards healing.
Right.
Whether that healing takes the form of reconciliation or moving on.
Okay, so we've discussed like his dilemma, the advice that he received, and just like the bigger picture of infidelity.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the forum itself.
Yeah.
Like, what does this tell us about how we approach these like really complex personal issues in the age of online communities?
It's like a fascinating case study because we see that the responses that he gets really run the gamut.
Yeah.
From like empathetic and supportive to very judgmental and practical to even downright vindictive.
Wow.
And it reminds us that these online forums, while they can be sources of great support, they can also be echo chambers that just amplify our existing biases and potentially lead people down these like unproductive paths.
It's so easy to give advice when you're behind a screen.
Right.
Detached from the real life complexities.
Yeah. It's like we're all playing armchair psychologist without the full picture.
Right.
And that's exactly the danger of relying solely on online advice for these deeply personal matters.
Right.
You know, every relationship is unique.
Right.
What works for one couple could be disastrous for another. There is just no substitute for personalized guidance from a qualified professional who can consider the nuances of each individual situation.
You know, we've spent this deep dive exploring John's story. We've analyzed all this conflicting advice he's getting and like considered the bigger picture of infidelity.
Yeah.
But there's one element I feel like we haven't really explicitly talked about yet, and that's the role of technology in all of this.
Yeah, the digital age has just irrevocably altered the landscape of relationships. I mean, it's given us these incredible tools for connection and for communication, but it's also opened up these new avenues for secrecy, deception, and even surveillance.
It's like a double-edged sword, right?
It is a double-edged sword.
On one hand, we have social media dating apps, encrypted messaging, all these platforms that can really facilitate infidelity. But then on the flip side, there's GPS, tracking, spyware, hidden cameras,
Yeah.
tools that can be used to uncover these indiscretions.
Right.
It's like a moral and ethical minefield.
It is. Technology itself is neutral, but it's how we use it
Right.
that really determines its impact. And this raises some significant questions about privacy, about trust, about boundaries in relationships.
Mhm.
When does monitoring cross the line into intrusion?
Right.
Is it ever justifiable to use technology to spy on your partner?
Right.
These are very, very complex questions.
Yeah. It feels like technology has just like amplified the stakes.
It has.
Suspicion can spiral out of control when you have access to all these digital footprints and location data and someone's online activity.
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in this web of evidence without ever really having an honest conversation.
And that's the danger, right?
Right.
We can become so fixated on this digital evidence that we lose sight of the human element.
Yeah.
Relationships thrive on trust, on communication, on emotional intimacy.
No.
And technology can nurture those things, but it can also erode them
Right.
if we're not careful.
It's almost like we're constantly teetering on the edge of this like digital abyss.
Yeah.
One wrong click, one suspicious text message, and that foundation of trust can just crumble.
It's a lot of pressure
Right.
for both individuals and for the relationships.
It is. So as we wrap up this deep dive into suspicion and evidence, I want to leave you with this. Relationships are ultimately about human connection.
Right.
And while technology plays a role, it should never overshadow the importance of open communication, of empathy, and of trust. So if you're facing a similar situation, just remember to prioritize those human elements even as you're navigating this complex digital landscape.
Those are wise words.
And for more fascinating deep dives into the human experience, be sure to subscribe to Voices of the Soul. You can also find more intriguing content over on the Shauna Palaj YouTube channel. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the complexities of what it means to be human.